I saw Dune on opening night in IMAX. The visuals were amazing. The sound was brutal. It was so loud. I feel like I need to watch this movie again. Not necessarily because of what I liked about it, but basically because the audiovisual experience was so far removed from anything that I would be experiencing in a home setting. The other reason that I feel I need to watch this again was that the story I watched was not the story that I expected from the trailers and from what was even being telegraphed in the film itself. A minor gripe I have with this film is that it essentially only served as setup for the next movies to come. This movie is a love letter to the novel itself, and this impacts the structure and pacing and presentation of the movie. There is a lot missing if it was trying to be more of a traditional movie experience. The story practically only takes us to the hero's point of no return, which in a regular movie should be at about 15 to 20 minutes in, rather than taking us all the way to a strong climax where he discovers a new normal. That's being saved for movie 2 or 3 down the line. I think for that reason, even though this movie is so long, it felt like it ended way too soon. Not to mention the fact that I totally expected Zendaya to end up having a much larger role by the end, as well as anticipated some sort of final climactic battle to happen. Denis Villeneuve is the type of filmmaker who really takes his time with his movies, and I don't mind a slow-paced film, but when a film takes this long just to tell you wait for part 2, it's kind of disappointing.
Wait, there's much, much more.
Denis also fills that time with what I personally think is pretty boring acting, and also constant apocalyptic music that makes it something of a challenge to get through. I get that this is ultimately just down to his directing style, so maybe it's just not for me. This was also part of my problem with Blade Runner 2049 as well. I just felt he wanted all his actors to deliver their lines with as little facial or vocal expression as possible, which for me takes all the life out of most of the characters. And then he throws deafening end-of-the-world music at you at every turn, and it just gets kinda samey after a while. Like, every time something bad happens, we have to bust out the bagpipes. That all being said, I have to hand it to Denis Villeneuve. He is definitely one of the best stylistic filmmakers and obviously knows how to tell a very engaging story. I just have some personal gripes with the liberties he takes with his style. My main problem with this film is that I almost felt like I didn't have enough time with each character to understand their significance. I was recently watching a review of Dune where the reviewer listed off all the main characters that did and didn't make it into the film, and it made me realize there were several characters in this film who I either just forgot about or I really still didn't understand what they were doing in the film. I'm sure for someone who's familiar with the story at large and familiar with these characters from the book, these characters probably stood out as clear as day. But I practically forgot Dave Bautista was in the film. I feel that the film tried to tell me that Duncan Idaho was a significant player, but he seemed practically interchangeable with Josh Brolin, who I don't remember who he was named, and the Fremen were largely kept mysterious for most of the film, which having them kept at bay for so long made it feel kind of random to me when Paul joined up with them, especially after he had already accepted the role of Duke, which fell to him after his father's capture and death. Basically, I didn't feel I had enough time with all these side characters to understand their significance, even in a 2.5-hour film. For instance, the relationship between Duncan and Paul, I saw that they were good friends, sure, but I didn't understand why that mattered. It's not like they ever went through a conflict together that would test their friendship. And when Duncan gave his life for Paul, it was kind of a de facto moment. Like, of course he would give his life, because his devotion to Paul has already been established and was never questioned. The way the scenes in this movie are written doesn't help me understand what makes the characters individuals, what they are fighting for, besides just Paul or House Atreides. Every time you see a new character in this film, you see them doing something, but you rarely see how that connects to what they stand for individually. It's basically just like, oh, this person's in the movie. And that's all you get from the scene, rather than using each scene to further a clear interpersonal conflict that threads through the whole movie. And I think this is ultimately what's really missing for me from the film, a clear emotional through line. There are a lot of ideological questions and scary moments and external challenges in Dune, but there are honestly not that many internal struggles, moments where somebody has to choose who they're going to be. Paul barely makes any choices in the film until after his dad dies and then after he kills one of the Fremen. I think instead what you could have done was make Paul really want to become a man and then really play up that everyone around him, much as he loves them, wants him to be something else. The next leader in training. A little brother, the one. You get glimpses of this through the film, but it's just not presented as something which ultimately conflicts with Paul's identity. He just sort of takes it until he walks away from it. I think that if you saw more of that interpersonal struggle, it would still work with the way this movie ends, with Paul deciding to find his own destiny with the Fremen. And it would make the splitting of House Atreides that much more poignant, because at the heart of it is Paul choosing to rebel against the people he loves, who all want him to be something he doesn't want to be. I don't know where the rest of the series is supposed to go. I've never read the books, but in terms of a single movie, this would just make a lot more sense to me, because then everything would be threaded through the same interpersonal conflict storyline. You would be able to show Paul really struggling with something, struggling with people he clearly loves and respects. Because, let's be honest, he doesn't really have that many external struggles. He's already pretty good at everything. He already knows how to fight. He already knows how to use the voice, almost. He withstood the pain box. He knows how to defeat temptation and evil. All of this is established at the beginning of the film, so what's the conflict for Paul? I think all this arises from how they chose to adapt the book, as accurately as possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean as the best film. If you're going to take 2.5 hours to tell the first act of a story, you need to mine for those emotional, interpersonal conflicts that are going to make the characters tick, rather than just appear randomly in the film, only to be randomly taken out an hour later. So, I don't know, we'll see what the next film brings.